They read my father's will without me. No call, no message. Just a quiet little gathering while I stood in line at the pharmacy, picking up the pain meds he never got to finish. They said it wasn't necessary for me to be there, said I wouldn't understand. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they were sipping wine and splitting lies, I was holding the real deeds in my hands. My father's signature, my name on every page. He left them the ceremony. He left me the truth. My name's Ben, and if you've ever been cast out by the very people who once called you family, this story is for you. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you are here with me and listening to me. Comment hearing below, or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reached. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. They buried my father without me. I wasn't even told there was a funeral until I got a call from Mrs. Ruby, the old neighbor with the wine chimes and the peonies. She didn't say much, just that it was a nice service, and such a shame I wasn't there. That's how I found out. Not from Diana, not from Tyler or Grace. From the woman next door. I drove back to Riverdale the next morning. 5 years gone, and not a single step felt unfamiliar. The turns, the old diner still with the neon open 24 hours sign, blinking half dead, the trees along Briar Street that my dad always said reminded him of Vermont. I left Denver before the sun came up, and by noon I was parked in front of the house I used to call home. Now it just looked sterile, polished, like no one really lived there anymore. Diana opened the door like she wasn't expecting me, even though she definitely was. She didn't hug me, just tilted her head and said, "Oh, you came." "Yeah," I said. "I heard about Dad." She didn't move to let me in. I thought maybe you wouldn't want to be involved anymore, after the way things ended. I stepped inside anyway. The house smelled different, less like cigar smoke and old wood, more like lavender cleaner and staged silence. My room, once filled with blueprint posters and books stacked on the floor, was now a storage space. They'd put my things in boxes, labeled them Ben, basement. I was told I could sleep in the guest room, the couch in the living room, technically. I sat out on the porch that evening, in the same spot where Dad used to sit after dinner, puffing a cigar and scribbling notes in a battered journal. I tried to remember the last thing he said to me. It wasn't kind, but it was honest. We'd argued about the riverfront project. He wanted community parks, walkable housing, sustainable design. Diana and her kids wanted to sell the land to a luxury developer and flip the name. "You don't understand how this works anymore," they said. "You think like a dreamer." I remember standing in that same foyer and shouting, "It's not about the profit, it's about the people," before I slammed the door behind me. I thought he'd call. He didn't. I thought I'd reach out. I didn't. We both let the silence stretch too long, and then it ended without a second chance. Now here I was, sleeping under a roof that used to be mine, surrounded by people who saw me as a shadow in their picture-perfect story. They didn't want me here when he was alive. They sure as hell didn't want me here now that he was gone. And that's when it hit me. They hadn't just cut me out of the funeral. They'd cut me out long before, and I had let them. Dinner was awkward, tense, the kind where everyone keeps talking over each other just so they don't have to hear what anyone's really saying. Tyler was going on about Stonegate Capital, saying he'd scheduled a call with them for the following week to finalize the transition. Grace nodded along, barely hiding her excitement. And Diana, well, she sat at the head of the table, sipping wine like she'd already won the game. "We'll be consolidating the properties soon," she said, "streamlining the portfolio. The riverfront plot's the biggest asset left." I looked up. "You're selling the riverfront?" Tyler chuckled. "It's just land, Ben. You should know better than anyone how little sentiment matters in development." "It's more than land," I said. He shrugged. "That's not how investors see it." I excused myself before dessert, walked up to the second floor, my feet almost instinctively leading me to the old study. The door creaked open like it hadn't been touched in months, maybe years. It smelled like cedar and dust and something fainter. Cigar smoke, maybe, or memory. Books still lined the shelves, though not as many as before. I ran my hand along the spines until one caught my eye. The Little Prince. The same copy Dad gave me when I turned 16. He wrote inside, "What is essential is invisible to the eye. Never forget that, Ben." I opened it. Folded inside the middle pages was a handwritten note. K309. Bank, Riverdale First. Combination, 1947-22. And then, in Dad's scrawl, "If you're reading this, I'm likely gone. Find Franklin." Franklin. I hadn't heard that name in years. He used to be Dad's right hand, his fixer, his brain, and sometimes his heart when Dad was too proud to show one. I interned under him back when I still believed in the family business. If anyone knew what this was about, it was him. The next morning, I walked into Riverdale First Bank like a man following ghost tracks. I gave the note to the manager. She didn't ask questions, just led me down the hallway to a safe deposit box. Inside were 4 things: a USB drive, a thick manila folder labeled Property Assets, Revised Ownership, a notarized document creating the Leary Legacy Trust, and listing me, Benjamin Leary, as sole beneficiary, and a letter. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper with my name at the top. "You were right. They only see numbers. You see people. I made my choice, Ben. I chose you. Don't let them turn this into another empire for sale. Protect what we built." I sat there in the cold bank vault, holding a truth no one else in that house knew. They thought they had it all. Thought I was the footnote in their inheritance story. But my father, he left them the ceremony. He left me the soul. Franklin's office still smelled like pine wood and old paper, a scent I hadn't realized I missed until I stepped in. He sat behind the same scratched walnut desk I remembered from summers long past. But today he looked different. Tired, cautious, and yet resolved. I didn't waste time. "You knew," I said. He nodded slowly, slid a thin file across the desk. Inside were printed emails between him and my father, dozens of them. Some were just musings, questions about structure, but many were crystal clear. Vincent Leary wanted his assets out of Diana's reach. Franklin's voice was low. 2 years ago, your dad started restructuring. Quietly, carefully, he pulled the major assets, Riverfront, Broadway Lofts, Leary Plaza, out of Leary Development and placed them under Leary Legacy Holdings. You, Ben, are the sole beneficiary. I didn't speak. I just kept reading. Deeds, notarized transfer forms, emails with timestamps, scanned copies of property tax payments, everything legitimate. "Does Diana know?" I asked. "No," Franklin said. "And when she finds out, she won't play fair." The words settled heavily in my chest. "And Harold?" I asked. Franklin's gaze turned distant. "He used to be loyal to your father, but Diana got her hooks in years ago. She's been controlling the flow, meetings, filings, even medical care. The pieces were falling together now. My absence hadn't been a fluke. It had been orchestrated. They wanted to erase me from the picture before the ink dried. And now, knowing what I held, they'd likely stop at nothing to protect their illusion. "There's something else," Franklin added, voice tightening. "They've already drafted a sales agreement with Stonegate Capital. Riverfront's on the table. Signing is set for the day after the will reading." I felt a slow burn ignite in my stomach. That land was supposed to be protected. My father's dream of building affordable homes with parks, schools, real community roots. "Stonegate wants luxury condos," Franklin continued. "Private dock access, no public infrastructure, no memory of what it was supposed to be." I nodded. "Then, I guess I'll be showing up at that will reading after all." But as I gathered the files, Franklin paused. "There's more." He tapped a different folder, one I hadn't noticed before. Inside were scans of older documents, 2019 and 2020. Among them, a notarized power of attorney document bearing my father's signature and Tyler's. "Look at this date," Franklin said. "Your father was recovering from surgery that week. Sedated, barely conscious." It hit me like a slap. Tyler had forged documents, legally binding ones. "If we prove this," Franklin said, "he's facing fraud, possibly criminal charges." I stepped out into the cold evening, head spinning. They thought I was out of the picture, but I was very much alive, and now I had the paperwork to prove it. They thought I'd come back for revenge. They were wrong. I came back to restore what was mine. The lobby of Harold Stevenson's law firm was quiet, almost sterile. I walked in straight-backed, wearing the dark navy suit my father bought me when I first pitched to the city council in Portland. It still fit, barely. The receptionist's eyes widened when I said my name. I wasn't told you'd be attending, she stammered. That makes two of us, I replied. Harold came out moments later, face frozen mid-smile when he saw me. Ben, he said carefully. I wasn't expecting. I'm here, I said calmly. And I have every right to be. His eyes flicked to the folder in my hand. There's no need to make a scene, he muttered. There's no scene, I answered. There's just the truth. Inside, the conference room buzzed with soft conversation. Diana in a pale suit, Tyler lounging like he owned the place, Rachel scrolling through her phone. A few extended family members looked up, confused, when I entered. Diana's expression curdled instantly. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Funny, I said. I thought this was a family reading. Harold cleared his throat, gesturing toward the chairs. Let's begin. But before he could reach the stack of documents, Diana reached into her bag and produced a glossy folder. There's been a recent addendum, she said, voice sweet as poison. Vincent signed it last year. It clarifies succession. Tyler inherits Leary Development in full. Harold hesitated. I saw his jaw tighten, but he nodded. Yes, I have this on file. I said nothing, just reached into my bag, pulled out my laptop, and hit play. My father's voice filled the room. Steady, firm, unmistakably lucid. This is Vincent Leary. As of this date, I have legally transferred all real estate assets under Leary Development to a separate trust, Leary Legacy Holdings. My son Benjamin is the sole beneficiary. Any prior documents are rendered void. The room went dead silent. Diana's face twisted. Tyler sat bolt upright. Harold took a deep breath. Given this video and the legal filings provided, we must proceed with the authenticated version. He pulled out a different set of papers, stamped and verified by the probate court. Benjamin Leary is recognized as controlling party for Leary Development and associated holdings. No one moved. No one spoke. I stood, placing a second folder in front of Diana. These are the property deeds. Signed, notarized, and filed. The land you tried to sell isn't yours to sell. She lunged forward, slamming a hand on the table. This is a farce. Vincent wasn't in his right mind. I met her eyes. There's a video, a letter, a full audit trail. Keep pushing, and I'll take this to court. I'd rather not, but I will. Tyler looked pale now. I noticed his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for a glass of water. After the meeting, I stayed behind. Harold lingered, visibly uneasy. As he packed away documents, I noticed a sticky note half tucked inside a file, one of Tyler's old contracts. I pulled it out. The terms listed a commercial lease agreement, one I'd never seen before, effective next month. It was signed by Tyler, but the terms? Brutal, almost predatory. It would bury one of our largest buildings under 10 years of debt. He'd signed it behind everyone's backs. I pocketed the note and left the building in silence. Outside, the wind cut sharper than before, but I didn't feel cold. I felt clarity. They had played their hand, and I was just getting started. The office at Leary Development hadn't changed much. Same gray carpeting, same frame photos of skyline developments that no longer felt like home. But the energy had shifted. Cold glances followed me as I walked past familiar desks, like a ghost returning to a house that no longer recognized him. I found Marla by the copier, older now, but just as sharp-eyed as I remembered. She didn't speak at first, just nodded toward the balcony. They cleaned out your dad's office the morning after the funeral, she said. Framed photos, plaques, even his cigars. Gone. Like he never existed. And they're planning to sell Riverfront next week. That word, sell, hit me like a punch. That land was never supposed to be currency. It was supposed to be community. Can I access the internal server? I asked. Marla hesitated, glanced around, then nodded. I never deleted your old login. I found an empty workstation and pulled up the backup archive. There they were, email threads between Tyler and Stonegate Capital. In them, Tyler promised a clean delivery of the land within 30 days. Diana was listed as the legal representative. I scanned further and found the development blueprint. Gone were the parks and public walkways. Instead, a private marina, rooftop lounges, VIP villas. The soul of the project gutted in favor of profit. Later that afternoon, Marla handed me a folder she'd been hiding in a file cabinet. You should see this too. Inside were signed papers, one dated during Dad's final round of chemo, where he had allegedly stepped down as honorary chairman. I knew my father's handwriting. This one was his, but shaky, as if coerced. He told me, Marla whispered. He knew they were pushing, but he said one thing again and again. Ben will come back. Tell him not to be afraid of them. I scanned and forwarded everything to my lawyer in Denver. I needed a plan, one that accounted for every counterstrike. That evening, I met Rachel at the old cafe near Main Street. She arrived in a hoodie and sunglasses, eyes darting like someone being followed. I found something, she said. I wasn't supposed to keep it, but I did. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was in Dad's things. Mom didn't see it. I didn't tell her. My breath caught when I opened the first page. It was Dad's handwriting. One entry stood out. Tyler lacks judgment. Diana insists he's enough. Says ownership matters more than vision. I worry this will undo everything. Rachel looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see Diana's daughter. I saw O'Leary. If you're trying to stop them, she said, I'll help. I nodded, heart pounding. We don't just stop them. We remind them who built this. That night, I stared out the motel window. Lights of Riverdale blinking like stars. I realized this was no longer about property. It was about protecting legacy. And mine had only just begun. The next morning, Rachel and I sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by boxes of files. Somewhere in the folders, buried under years of neglect, was Dad's old laptop, dusty but still functional. Inside, hidden in a buried directory labeled Personal, we found it. A PDF named Addendum Final. I opened it. It was the same document Diana had presented at the will reading, word for word, but the metadata revealed the truth. It had been created from Tyler's user account at a time when Dad was hospitalized. I forwarded the file to a digital forensics specialist in Denver. The report came back. The document had never touched Dad's computer. The signature was copied, the file authored by Tyler. It was a fake. An elaborate forgery crafted to distract from the real transfer of power that had already taken place. I needed to confront Harold. Again. He wouldn't answer calls or texts. So I went to his home. He opened the door, face pale. I know why you're here, he said quietly. I didn't wait. I pulled out a USB and played a recording. It was Dad's voice, shaky but clear. No one is allowed to alter my estate plan. I've sealed it. Everything has already been transferred. Let it be. Harold sank into his chair like he'd been punched. I tried to stay out of it, he said. I owed Diana. She helped pay for my wife's cancer treatment last year. I thought I could just stay neutral. Neutrality doesn't exist in a lie, I said. He looked at the floor for a long time before nodding. I'll resign as their counsel, and I'll release your father's final documents to the court. As I stepped outside, the wind was sharper, the street too quiet. That's when I noticed the black SUV. It had followed me from Harold's. I turned the corner, ducked into a bookstore, then circled back. The SUV was still there. Later, a friend at the city records office confirmed the license was registered to a firm contracted by Stonegate Capital. Diana had gone further than I expected, bringing in surveillance, pressure, threats. I realized the game wasn't legal anymore. It was about power. I spent the next 2 nights preparing a press package. Not just documents, audio, video, handwritten letters, diary entries. I sent them to 3 trusted local journalists. The story was ready. A grieving son uncovering a plot to erase his father's legacy. The moment it aired, the first crack in their wall appeared. I wasn't just fighting for a company anymore. I was fighting for a man who believed in community, for a name they tried to bury, for values they called outdated. But more than anything, I was fighting to prove that silence isn't loyalty. and that some legacies refuse to die. It was nearly midnight when Rachel sent the scanned copy to my inbox, subject line, "You need to see this." I opened it in bed, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. The document was a finalized purchase agreement between Diana and Stonegate Capital. But something was off. She had signed the deal not as a representative of Leary Development, but as a private individual. That one detail shifted everything. I pulled out Dad's old files from the storage box beneath my motel bed, flipping through the contracts and bylaws he left behind. In the founding agreement, there was a clause. No property with designated community use may be sold or transferred without full consensus from all executive members. And I, Benjamin Leary, was still listed as a majority stakeholder and legal trustee. They had nothing. I made a few calls, booked a seat at the private meeting Stonegate was hosting the next morning at the Riverdale Business Alliance. I showed up 10 minutes early, watched through the frosted glass as Diana confidently pitched the future of Riverfront, pointing to renderings of resorts, high-end restaurants, helicopter pads. I waited until the projector dimmed, then stepped through the door with my portfolio. The room froze. "I'm Benjamin Leary," I said, voice steady, "and this entire project is illegal." I laid the documents across the table. Dad's original contract, my legal control over Leary Legacy Holdings, and proof of my refusal to sign any consent for this sale. The faces of the Stonegate board went pale. One of them, a young executive in a sharp gray suit, looked at Diana and said, "You told us the board was unanimous." Diana tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Within 10 minutes, Stonegate officially withdrew, citing unresolved compliance issues. I walked out knowing they weren't just abandoning the deal. They were abandoning her. That evening, as I left the hotel to grab dinner, a man in a denim jacket brushed past me and slid an envelope into my hand without a word. I opened it back in my car. Inside, a single photo. Dad standing next to a woman I'd never seen before. Early 2000s, judging by the furniture in the background. Scribbled beneath in thick ink. Want the real reason this all started? Find her. On the back of the photo, Lorraine. No last name, but I knew who she was. Rachel helped me dig. Within hours, we found a trail. Lorraine, the name barely mentioned in any of Dad's public documents, was his former executive assistant. She left suddenly 7 years ago and never returned. Current address, a cabin near Flathead Lake, Montana. That night, I packed a bag. If this woman was the missing piece, I needed to see her before anyone else did. As I drove through the night, past endless pines and winding roads, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Clarity. Diana's empire was cracking, but what I was heading toward now wasn't just the end of her grip. It was the beginning of the truth Dad had never spoken. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, barely visible through the thin veil of snowflakes that coated the windshield. I parked the rental car on the gravel path and approached slowly, clutching the notebook I had carried from Riverdale. Lorraine answered the door without a word, eyes sharp, her hair a wave of silver. "I know who you are," she said before I could speak, "and I know why you're here." She didn't invite me in at first, just stood there, the cold biting at our breath. I held up Dad's journal. "He mentioned you," I said. "He trusted you. So do I." Her shoulders softened. "Come in," she said. "Let's talk." The inside was modest, lived in, warm. We sat by a fire she stoked with pine logs. For hours, she told me everything. How she and my father had fallen in love quietly after his separation from my mother. How she had helped him rebuild the company's ethical backbone after a crisis in the early 2000s. How they had nearly married, until her heart diagnosis changed everything. "I couldn't burden him," she said, eyes wet. So I left. No goodbye. Just disappeared. I thought it was mercy, but it turned out to be cowardice. When Dad met Diana, Lorraine said he was still fractured. "He knew she wasn't you," I said. "But he was tired, and she was persistent." Lorraine nodded. He never trusted her, but by then she had positioned herself too well. Then she opened a drawer and handed me a thick envelope. "Your father asked me to keep this. He said, if Ben finds you, he's ready." Inside was a manuscript, handwritten, careful, and titled, "Leary, From Legacy to Liability." It was part memoir, part postmortem, a deep analysis of how ambition without morality corrodes a family from the inside. I flipped to the last page. There, in slanted blue ink, was one line. If Ben finds this, don't let him fight from anger. Let him lead from what we lost. Integrity. My throat clenched. I looked at Lorraine. He knew I'd come? He always believed you would, she said. That's why he never sent this, she added, handing me a sealed envelope. On it, to Ben, open when you're not angry anymore. I stepped outside into the snow and opened it with numb fingers. The letter was short. I knew one day you'd come home not to fix what was broken, but to honor what was good. That's all I ever wanted. If you remember why we started, they can't take anything from you. Not really. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt peace. My father's war wasn't against Diana or Tyler or even Stonegate. It was against the erosion of purpose. I had the tools now, the documents, the truth, the power. But the question echoed louder than ever. What would I build with it? Not a fortress, not a fight, a legacy? Just like he meant it. The drive back from Montana was quiet, long, and sobering. I kept Dad's handwritten letter tucked in the inside pocket of my coat, like a compass pointing to something deeper than revenge, something rooted in honor. Lorraine's envelope was heavier than it looked. Inside was a report, but not just any corporate memo. It was a manifesto, a clear-eyed moral audit of Leary development, cataloging not just numbers, but choices, failures, ambitions that lost their way, and a blueprint of what could be redeemed. I didn't want to sit on that truth anymore. I wanted the world to see it, in the exact place it all began, Riverdale Community Hall, the same building where Dad had given his first public speech about building homes, not just houses. I called in favors, rented the venue, invited press, alumni, old investors, and, perhaps predictably, Diana and Tyler showed up too. Not out of curiosity or shame, but damage control. The room was packed with familiar faces I hadn't seen since I walked away that rainy night years ago, when I thought I was done with all of this. But this time, I wasn't here to plead. I stood under the warm lights, looked them all in the eye, and started from the beginning. I laid it all out, the fake addendum to the will, the manipulation of internal communications, the shady contract with Stonegate, the attempt to erase not just property lines, but the very intent that built them. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth. I showed the old footage of Dad, frail but clear-eyed, saying, "If Ben finds this, I know he'll carry on." Not with anger, but with decency. Then something I didn't plan happened. Harold walked in. He was pale, older than I remembered. He stepped up, paused in front of the microphone, and said with trembling clarity, "I failed, my friend. I let loyalty to comfort outweigh loyalty to truth." Then he pulled out a document. "This," he said, "is Vincent Leary's final, legally notarized revocation of all prior wills. And this," he held up a small drive, "is a private recording he asked me to keep, in case anyone questioned it." The screen lit up. Dad's voice filled the room, calm, certain. "If Ben finds this, I want him to finish what I couldn't, with kindness, with clarity, with no desire to punish, only to protect." The room fell silent. No applause, no murmurs. Just that kind of stillness that only comes when people realize they've been looking in the wrong direction for too long. Diana left without a word. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, like the sound of something breaking but refusing to shatter out loud. Tyler caught my eye. For a second, I thought he'd approach. Instead, he turned and followed her out. When the room emptied, I stayed behind. I looked at the old black and white photo still hanging on the hall's back wall. Dad at the drafting table, sleeves rolled, eyes focused on a blueprint no one else could see. I stepped closer, and for a moment, I could feel him again. Not in the air, but in the weight that had lifted from my chest. He'd planned this handover, not of assets, but of belief, and I had finally received it. 30 days later, Leary Development was no longer a private enterprise. I filed the final documents converting its core assets into a community trust, a public entity built to preserve affordable housing, cultural centers, and green spaces. the same dream my father had written about. Rachel, to her credit, took on the stewardship role with remarkable grace. I stayed on the board, but only symbolically. I didn't want the power, I just wanted the shape of the legacy to remain intact. Diana moved out of the estate within the week, into a quieter part of town. No lawsuits, no retaliation, just distance. Tyler disappeared altogether. A mutual contact said he may have moved to Austin. I didn't follow up. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer had anything to gain from watching someone run from what they weren't ready to face. I moved into the old wooden house near the edge of the Leary lot, the first home my dad ever built. It was small, creaky, a little drafty in the mornings, but it was real. Every morning, I'd sit on the porch with a mug of black coffee and let the sun hit my face through the cracked window pane. The same light Dad used to watch in silence, without asking it for anything. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need validation anymore. Just peace. And the quiet assurance that somewhere, maybe in some way I'll never fully understand, he saw all this unfolding. He saw me return. He saw me choose the harder road, the one without applause, without headlines, without a scoreboard. Then, one morning, a small brown package arrived at the front step. No return address, no stamps, just my name in black ink. Inside was a worn-out paperback copy of A Father Through a Son's Eyes. A red slash had been drawn across the first page, but below it, a handwritten line. You may not remember me, but I remember what you did. Thank you. T. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just closed the book, placed it beside the others on the shelf Dad once built, and sat back on the porch. Sometimes people come around. Not when you expect them to. Not in the way you need, but in the way they can. That morning, the sun came through the window just as it had every day. No brighter, no dimmer, but somehow more complete. I didn't need to keep my father alive. I only needed to keep alive what he believed in. And if I did that, if I just lived that way, maybe that was enough. Maybe that's what legacy really means. That's all I have for now. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. Every messy detail, every quiet truth, and every choice that brought me back to where it all began. If you've ever carried a weight that wasn't yours to bear, if you've ever stood at the edge between letting go and holding on, if you've ever looked at the people you love and wondered why it had to hurt so much, or maybe, even if none of this has happened to you, but something in it rang true, just comment yes below. Because sometimes we don't need the perfect response. We just need someone to say, I hear you. And maybe this space, right here, right now, can be that place where we're allowed to feel, to remember, and to begin again. You don't have to explain. You don't have to fix it all. Just be here. Until next time, take care of your heart. And remember, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It just means you've chosen to keep going with softness, with strength, and with your story still unfolding.
What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family drama, shocking betrayals, and the revenge stories you won't believe.